The problems of challenge force with radical Islam, 1.3 billion Muslims from London to Jakarta. They don't think very highly of you and me. We've seen the poll numbers. We don't rank as well as used car salesmen. And it's kind of hard, isn't it, for us to understand, because we think we're pretty good people, pretty decent people. The rise of China and India, nation building, humanitarian crises happening day after day, poverty, disease, development, globalization, the changing global economy, climate change, limited resources, nuclear weapons. The challenges go on. And of course, you have to put in that list of challenges the unknown, don't you? When Al Gore and George Bush debated about foreign policy in that 2000 election, the 9/11 Commission looked back and we found that there was only one mention by either one of the candidates in the entire campaign of the word terrorism. But terrorism came to dominate the presidency of George Bush. So the sheer number and complexity of these problems is bound to impress all Americans, and of course especially the new president. And so I think about the central realities confronting that president. Let me mention 4 of them. You may want to add to the list, you may want to subtract to it. Number 1, I think most of us would agree upon, with some reservation perhaps now, but number 1 would be the preeminence of American power. I know some of the limitations of that power, but there isn't any doubt that America is preeminent today in power, in military terms, in economic terms, in cultural terms. And yet, while our ability to accomplish things around the globe is unparalleled, it's also limited. And Americans, I believe, are deeply unsettled about the role that America should play in the world today. The United States is dominant, but we have learned, a bit to our distress, that we cannot solve all these problems by ourselves. The preeminence of American power. A second reality that I would mention is the shifting global alignments taking place. The world order today, I think, is as fluid as it has been at any time during my experience in these matters. China and India rapidly on the rise. You cannot sit down and have a discussion in Washington, D.C. today about foreign policy without somebody bringing up the word China. Sometimes I think we're fixated on it. But the rise of China is going to have a profound impact on every life in this room and how we relate to that rise. India likewise. 2 countries, huge populations, fast-growing economies, advanced technologies, nuclear weapons, and remarkable political and military potential. The European Union is enlarged. Russia lurches between democracy and authoritarianism, engagement and estrangement. New powers in regions like Brazil and Indonesia. These changes are transforming the landscape of the international scene with a shift towards Asia and towards more centers of global power. And the third central reality may be the mega trend, and that's the one we know as by the word globalization, the interconnectedness, the interdependence. I stepped out of a hotel a few years ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and picked up a newspaper, and my eye fell on about a 3-sentence story down at the bottom of a business page for some reason, and it said that the currency in Thailand was unstable. And I said to myself, well, no big deal. No sweat off my back. Why should I worry about that? And a week later, I saw that the Indonesia stock market had some problems. And a week after that, the Japanese. And about a month later, the New York Stock Exchange collapsed. Interdependence, interconnectedness. Now, the problem with globalization is that it's not global. There are winners and there are losers. If you listen carefully to the Democratic candidates who are debating this question, they talk about trade all the time. But trade is really a kind of a catchword for globalization. And the American worker today, and the candidates have certainly picked this up, are uneasy, worried about the future and their jobs. And so the candidates speak to that problem through the symbol, if you would, of trade. And a fourth central reality is simply turmoil. Everywhere you look, economic, cultural, political convulsions caused by rapid change, weak governments, civil wars, epidemics, disease, environmental and population crises. I read about a month ago, small article, page 30, 40, big newspaper. 4 million citizens of Africa killed in the last 7 or 8 years. 4 million. I don't even remember hearing about it. I don't remember seeing anything on television about it. I don't remember any articles in the Washington Post or the New York Times. 4 million people die, and I, who follow international events reasonably closely, didn't know about it. 4 million people? What difference does it make? Why worry about them? Turmoil. Does that have consequences? You bet it has consequences. And we'll be learning about those consequences for years to come. Terrorism and the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons may be the most urgent symbol of this turmoil. I worry about the erosion of the non-proliferation regime in the world. And when somebody asks me what should be the dominant concern of American foreign policy, it's an easy question for me. It's the possibility of nuclear weapons getting into bad hands. Not because it's the most likely, but because the consequences of it are beyond anything we can imagine. 3,000 people dead on 9/11. And just think a moment of all of the changes in your life and in this country with 3,000 dead. Let your mind play on what we said would be the result if a nuclear bomb went off in Manhattan. In our 9/11 Commission report, we said there would be 500,000 dead. We can't imagine that. We don't know what would happen in this country if we had that kind of an experience. And so I say, Mr. President, whoever you are, put this at the top of the list because the consequences are so severe.